Hey friends, welcome back. This is Ashley with Uncommon Roots Homestead, and I'm with Jill here at Whispering Willow Farm. Still, we were here.
It's a holiday weekend.
It is. And I figured that today we could maybe just chat a little bit, and then you could take me around your garden and show me what's going on here.
Absolutely. That's my favorite thing to do, is show off the garden.
And it's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
I came out here this morning before Jill even got up and was like creeping around in her garden, like filming some Instagram stories, and all of a sudden I heard her like come out the back door. I was like, oh, just showing everybody your garden.
Don't mind me.
Awesome. So, Jill, I kind of want to know, this is Cat's Out of the Bag. They're buying Roots and Refuge Farm, which we had the chance to go over and see last night, and it's absolutely gorgeous. We talked a little bit about it over on Jill's channel, but I don't know. I want to know, like, this is your last season here growing and just being here. Like your entire farm, this is your last time here.
Yeah.
So what are you, like, sad? Like, what are you going to miss? And what are you excited to, I don't know, what are you excited to, like, see through this year?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, we have kind of maxed out our beds here.
Yeah.
And I did that because I really just wanted to push the limits. And so, for those of you who don't know me, I have sold produce to our local community for several seasons. That's really kind of been the heart of what we do, although we do create content, and that is primarily what we do. I've always sold produce, and that's something that I've just really wanted to stay connected to our community in that way. And so this year, I've taken off from selling produce, and so that's really kind of cool. And not having to have a bed be a productive bed,
right?
Just having a bed be a pretty bed where I can put multiple things in, and it can kind of be this wild, beautiful thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's what I'm most excited for. I found myself going through and, like, seeding basil here and maybe adding something else here.
Or letting things grow that volunteer.
Yes, I have, like, rock in my garden bed, and so we have all of these volunteer cucamelons and sunflowers and zinnias, and Ashley's like, what are you gonna do with those? I'm like, I'm gonna let them things grow. And so I think I'm excited to, one, not have the pressure of selling and having to maintain in that sense of, it is kind of stressful. Is it gonna be productive? Is it not? Like, how much am I gonna get from this bed? Because that is something you think through. Every time you plant a bed, you think, well, how much am I making per bed? What are my markets to?
It adds a lot of pressure.
It does, yeah, because there's so many things you can't control, right? Like weather and things like that, or disease, pests. And so just to be able to plant a bed for the sake of planting a bed because it's beautiful, I don't have to sell it. I am really looking forward to that. It's just a really relaxed approach, and I am glad that, like, this is how I'm ending my season on just growing things that make my heart happy.
Yeah.
Not worried about selling. Just really soaking up the garden for all that it has to offer.
So wait, is this your first time ever gardening in this space with, like, no selling?
Yes.
Wow.
Even the first year we moved here, I brought all my stuff in 5-gallon buckets. I still sold on a very small scale that first year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so, like, what... I guess you'll need to let's walk around in just a minute, because I want to know, like, where was your garden for you, or was the entire space like a production space and you guys just kept the overflow of that?
Yep.
Wow. Well, this is exciting then. Because I think about that all the time. Because we have the potager garden, which is just for us, and we've talked a little bit about, like, do we want to, Kevin has a lot of flexibility. He's talked about wanting to, like, create a market garden, and I've always been, like, really set on, like, not mixing those. Like, I do not want the potager garden to be the market garden, because I feel like, especially with my personality, like, if I like got into that, I would, like, it would change it for me. And so how cool that you get a season where you get, like, in this space to just enjoy it with no strings attached and, like, no expectations and no, like, stress of, well, all my summer squash died, like, no big deal. It's like, you're not like, oh my gosh, I have a buyer and I have no squash.
So I did grow the cut flowers with the intention to sell, but I also never set up a market to where, like, they weren't, most of my crops I had sold before I planted. That's typically what we do. So with the cut flowers, I didn't do that. I'm growing them just to alleviate pressure. If I do, they end up being beautiful, I do have a place to sell them. But that would be the only thing, and it's still different because it's not produce. It's a little bit easier to navigate.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a I mean, if you have the option to sell your overflow, that's different than like needing to
Yes.
sell your
like, hey, what
overflow.
are you going to provide me with every single week?
Right.
Pounds, things like that. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, well, and I was talking to somebody else, and they were actually talking about chicken eggs in the same way. That, like, you know, once you start selling to consistent buyers with chicken eggs, like, some people get into the point where they can't even, like, they don't have enough eggs for themselves because you get, like, you don't have complete control. Like, we're talking about gardening, we're talking about animals, like, we're talking about things you don't really have control over, no matter how skilled you are.
Yeah, which is something I always say too. Figure out your why. Like, why are you gardening? Why are you homesteading? Why are you farming? Because that is going to be the driving factor. If it is to sustain your family, if it's to grow your own family's food for the year, selling probably doesn't make sense. If it is to run a business and this is what you want to do as a career, looking into market gardening, look into those different avenues. But I always encourage people, figure out your why, because that is going to be the driving factor on why you do everything, you know, on your farm.
Well, and it gives you kind of like a scale to hold everything up against, because if you say, okay, this is my why, this is what I'm doing, then every idea that you have, or like every opportunity that comes to you, you can level that up against your why. It's kind of like that core value of like, what am I trying to accomplish here in my life and my business and everything that I'm doing. And if it fits up, great, let's do it. And if it doesn't, it's like, it makes it easier. You don't have to sit and like in turmoil over these decisions. Like, should I sell this? If like that's not your why,
and
then
you will plant your garden based off of your goals.
Exactly.
So
and you'll enjoy it based on your goal, right? Like, so it's you have complete control over all of that.
Absolutely.
So I want to see.
Let's do it.
Jill.
Yes.
I want to see where you used to plant. So you told us about some of the stuff that you've done. So I'd like to see, you know, what those production beds looked like. And then I want to see some of the things you're most excited about, like actually getting before you move.
Yeah, absolutely. So tomatoes is primarily what we sold, heirloom varieties. We sold to like 4 different restaurants. Kind of spanned out. Nathan was my delivery guy, so it worked out good. He did most of my deliveries. And so that was actually over here where our cut flower bed is.
Okay.
So we had this.
It's a huge bed.
It is. Yeah, it's like 36 foot long, I think.
Yeah, and really wide.
Yes, and like that's an 8 foot. I think that's an 8 foot cross tie.
Yeah, that's a huge
I don't really
bed.
know the specs on my beds, okay? Nathan builds them, I grow in them.
Hey, as long as they grow food, right?
Yes, it's kind of how that works. And so we did a trellis system over here, which Josh Satin did. If you're wanting to dabble into market gardening, he's a really good resource. He's just super, super knowledge-based. And so we had this trellis system with just T-post, conduit, and some PVC like fittings. And we would just line them up, and I'd plant them super, super close, like 12 inches apart, heavy prune.
Yeah.
And this was a huge production bed. And we did the same thing with cherry tomatoes in this bed where our zucchini and sunflowers are. And so those 2 beds right there put out
like lots of tomatoes.
Yeah, I mean, we put out a lot of production in those beds.
Did you ever weigh how much food came out of your garden?
No, but I was getting to where I was selling like over 60 pounds of tomatoes a week.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a lot of food.
Yeah, it is a lot of food.
It's a lot of food.
Yeah, and now there are cut flower beds and our food beds. So
this is Jill in her natural habitat.
taking photos of my beautiful things. First dahlia bloom, and I'm feeling pretty proud. I grew all these dahlias from seed, which I don't know if you guys like know much about flowers. I really don't, but you can grow dahlias from either seed or tubers. Tubers are probably the more traditional. You can get some more selective varieties. So I really didn't like have any high expectations, because I was like, so many people told me, oh, dahlia from seeds aren't that great, you know, like you should have bought tubers. And so I was kind of like, check that out. I grew that bad boy from seed. It's so pretty.
It's beautiful. And that's gonna open up so much more.
Oh yeah, I am so excited. So that's, I'm encouraged. This is, you wanna know what I'm most excited for? This right here. I'm so pumped.
It's so many flowers.
So many flowers.
All right, so since Jill was telling us all about this bed that used to be like a high production tomato bed, and now she's got her zinnias here, and she actually set these up to be cut flowers. And so she created this whole system that she implemented that essentially, so zinnias, when they grow, if you leave them wild, right? Like, so we've all seen like the wild patch of zinnias that's just beautiful and kind of everywhere. Well, if you're trying to sell cut flowers, that's not super ideal. Their stems can get really curvy. One of the things I love about zinnias is that in our last garden, so at our suburban house, in our garden, we didn't have a lot of sun. And so most of what I planted didn't do that well. And so it was such a bummer. You know, I went from this tiny garden space to a larger space, but then it wasn't a good space. Like we struggled a lot with the environment. But one thing that I found was that the zinnias didn't care. So if you're dealing with a hard gardening space and you don't have a lot of sun, try zinnias, because ours took off. But what we found is that one of the reasons they didn't care is that they just made a way. They didn't care what was going on around them, and they just like curved and twisted around everything to get what they needed. And that's great if you're looking for like a pretty ornament in your garden, but if you're trying to sell flowers, you don't really want like corkscrew stems. So that's why she put this into place. But she also has some really great tips on how to pinch back zinnias and really get the most out of your zinnias. And so, Jo, do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let me flip you around.
So, I encourage everyone, I was actually just telling Ashley, I encourage everyone to grow zinnias, because although I do have this horticulture netting on here, it's just because of what I'm trying to get out of my zinnias. You can literally, once these bloom and then they die back, you can just take that entire head and just like drizzle it into your garden bed, and it's gonna produce the most abundant flowers the next year. They're super low maintenance. If you're a beginner gardener and you're just wanting to add pollinators into your garden, or maybe you're wanting to dabble into flowers and you just don't know a ton about it, zinnias is a great flower to start with. Sunflowers are a really easy flower to start with, and there's so many different colors and varieties, and so I really appreciate that too, because you can't, you know, you don't just have to grow like one thing. I've got probably 10 different varieties of zinnias just in these two you know, rows right here, so that's really nice. So zinnias, if you want to come down here, I can show. This zinnia has not been pruned, so this would be an example of what happens if you don't pinch or deadhead your zinnia. It's just gonna grow, it's gonna put off all these side shoots, which are then gonna put off side shoots. All of those are gonna produce flowers. However, if you pinch them, so if you zoom in right here, you can see that this was a straight stem, and I literally just took pruners and cut it off, which encouraged these side shoots to now be a main part of the plant. And you can see how much healthier this is. So we've got a bud here, there's gonna be a bud here, which then put off this shoot and this shoot. So if I'd have left this straight, it would have looked like this. Now you can see shorter how much bigger this entire plant is.
And it's got way more flowers.
It has way more flowers. It's gonna have a, you know, just produce way more. You're literally doubling the amount of flowers you can get out of it. And then they don't get tall and leggy. They just kind of stay stocky. They grow better. Just start putting off all of this extra flowers. It really is super beneficial just to prune your zinnias. You can also prune your dahlias. There's several flowers that you can do that too, and they are benefited from the haircut.
And what's interesting is that I never even like considered pinching back or like pruning my zinnias, because I didn't, they're just to be pretty in my garden. But seeing how much more you can get when you do that, I mean, it would be that much prettier.
Yeah, so you can also take the cuttings and you can root them down in water and propagate them. And so that's really beneficial, because you're just getting all of these free plants. Say maybe you started a variety and you ran out of seeds, maybe it was out of stock or whatever. When you pinch them, just take it, stick it in a mason jar or whatever type of, you know, jar you have with water. Usually in like 4 to 5 days, you'll start seeing roots. You can up pot them and wait until they're bigger and then transplant them out. I actually just transplant them out directly into my garden, and then you got zinnias. So you're getting 2 for the price of 1. You can do this several times. You can do this with a lot of different things too. Your tomatoes, you can take the suckers and root down and have other tomato plants. There's a lot of different things you can do.
A lot of free plants. A lot of free plants already in your garden. One thing about zinnias that I love is that if you've never grown or had zinnias before, when they bloom, if you cut those and you put them in water in your house, they stay, like they last for weeks. Like I've had zinnias on my counter for like 3 or 4 weeks, and they just are beautiful. Their stems are hollow, which is interesting. And so you might like cut them, and if you're gonna be inside in like 30 or 40 minutes, they start to look like they're dying, and you're like, oh man, they already died. As soon as you get them into water, they suck all that water back up, they firm up again, and like they're the best. They're great. So these are those zinnias that Jill was telling us about that she's just letting go. Now did you pinch those?
No, I didn't. So I had zinnias here last year, and when they died, I just let them die. And so they all just self-seeded into the concrete. And then I've got some sunflowers behind you too.
Okay.
Which we're just letting, you know, see what they're gonna do.
I like it. Okay. Jill made me delicious coffee. And look at these already starting to climb.
Oh, I know. Those are huge. These are the center cut squash. These are a cross between a zucchini and a tromboncino. And a tromboncino is that really, really long squash that I love, but I have a hard time selling it because it's so big and it's just super unique. And so this Row 7 Seeds did a cross to where it will look like a tromboncino, supposedly still tastes like a tromboncino, which is a really mild squash. You can actually eat it raw. And then it just doesn't get as big. So I am really excited.
It's doing great too.
Yeah, it is.
It is for sure. So thank you. It's been so cool to be here and like see your setup and see everything you're doing. And it's been amazing to spend time in this garden, because I know if you're anything like me, you've watched this garden, you've seen this garden on your TV or your phone or whatever. And it's cool to walk through and kind of see it through your eyes, but not through your lens, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
To see you kind of walk through and just be in your element in your garden has been really cool. So thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. I watched her video yesterday on the way to Jessica's, and I was like, it is so funny to see someone else's view of your garden in your space. And I was like, look at that. And look how bad.
It doesn't. I was telling you, like, I mean, this is a beautiful space. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in our own space that you're like, you only see its flaws, right? Like you only see the weeds, or you only see the beds that are falling apart. Every time I walk through my garden, all I see are those 24-foot beds that are like falling apart. But I know that that's not what you all see, and I know that's not what other people who come to visit see either. And so it's cool to be there and to be able to like encourage your friend and be like, hey, this is a beautiful space, and I didn't even notice the weeds. Like I didn't even notice those.
They're there.
They always are. They're there everywhere. If someone tells you they don't have weeds, like,
they're lying.
Especially if they say they do things organically.
Yeah.
Don't trust them. Anyways, thank you for joining us today. You always have a place in Jill's garden and in mine. Until next time.